It was a quiet morning. Nothing unusual, nothing special. Just another day that looked exactly like the ones before it. The light came in slowly through the window. Soft, gentle, the kind of light that doesn't wake you up suddenly, but invites you to open your eyes. I remember lying there, not moving, listening. The world was calm, no loud noises, no rushing cars, no voices, just the distant sound of birds and the faint movement of leaves outside. For a moment, everything felt still, peaceful, and yet there was something different, something I couldn't explain. Not a big feeling, not a strong emotion, just a small shift somewhere inside me. Have you ever felt that? When nothing around you has changed, but something within you quietly has? I didn't understand it at first. So I did what I always did. I got out of bed, slowly, walked to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee. The same routine, the same movements, everything familiar. But even in those simple actions, I felt slightly disconnected, as if I was watching myself instead of being fully present. I held the warm cup in my hands, looked out the window, and that's when I noticed it. The street, the same street I had seen every day. But that morning, it looked different. Not physically, nothing had changed. The same houses, the same trees, the same quiet road, but the feeling was different. It felt distant, as if it didn't belong to me anymore. And that thought stayed. I didn't push it away. I didn't try to explain it. I just let it be there. After breakfast, I sat down at the table. My phone was next to me. My work bag was ready. Everything prepared. All I had to do was follow the usual path. Go to work, sit at my desk, complete my tasks, talk to the same people, come home, rest, repeat. A simple life, a stable life, a predictable life, and for a long time, that had been enough. But that morning, for the first time, it didn't feel enough anymore. I looked at my phone. There were messages, emails, notifications, everything waiting for me, as usual. But I didn't reach for it. I just sat there, quiet, still, listening to that small voice inside me. It wasn't loud. It didn't give clear instructions. It didn't say change your life. It simply asked a question, a very simple question. Is this really the life you want to keep living? I didn't answer because I didn't know how. Instead, I stood up, walked back to the window, and stayed there for a long time, watching, thinking, feeling. Minutes passed, maybe more. I wasn't counting. Time felt slow, soft, unimportant. And then something unexpected happened. A memory appeared, not from yesterday, not from last week, but from years ago. A version of me that I had almost forgotten. I saw myself younger, standing in a different place, with different dreams, different energy, different eyes. Back then, life felt open, full of possibilities, uncertain but exciting. I remembered what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted, to create something meaningful, to explore, to feel alive, not just safe, not just comfortable, alive. And as that memory became clearer, another realization followed. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking those questions, stopped dreaming like that, stopped wondering, not because I chose to, but because life became routine, responsibilities, expectations, practical decisions. One by one, they shaped my life. And slowly, without noticing, I had become someone who simply followed the path in front of him, not someone who chose it. That realization was quiet, but powerful. It didn't hurt, but it felt honest. And sometimes, honesty is more uncomfortable than pain. I took a deep breath, still standing by the window, still holding that moment. And I asked myself something I hadn't asked in years. When did I stop listening to myself? No answer came, but the question stayed strong, clear, real. The clock moved forward. The day was waiting. But I wasn't ready to move yet because something important was happening, not outside, but inside. A shift, a beginning, so small that no one else could see it, but big enough to change everything. I didn't make a big decision that morning. I didn't quit my job. I didn't call anyone. I didn't announce anything. From the outside, nothing changed. But inside, a door had opened. And once a door like that opens, it never fully closes again. That day, I went to work, like always, sat at my desk, like always, did my tasks, like always. But everything felt slightly different. Not wrong, just not fully right anymore. And that difference stayed with me all day, in every moment, in every conversation, in every silence. It was subtle, but constant, like a quiet reminder that something inside me had started to wake up. And once something wakes up, it begins to ask more questions. It begins to look deeper. It begins to notice things you used to ignore. That quiet morning didn't change my life instantly. There's no dramatic moment, no sudden transformation, but it did something more important. It started a process, a slow, gentle, honest process, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that grows quietly, over time. And sometimes, the most powerful changes in life don't begin with a big decision. They begin with a quiet morning, a simple question, and the courage to finally listen. If you are listening to this now, maybe you've had a morning like that. Or maybe you are waiting for one. But the truth is, those moments don't come from outside. They come from within, from a part of you that is still paying attention, still honest, still awake. So the next time you feel that quiet shift, don't ignore it. Don't rush past it. Just pause, listen, and see what it is trying to tell you. Because that small moment might be the beginning of a life you haven't discovered yet. The next morning, I woke up a little earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because something inside me was still awake. That quiet feeling from yesterday, it hadn't disappeared. It was still there, soft, gentle, but present. I lay in bed for a moment, looking at the ceiling, and I noticed something strange. I didn't want to rush. Usually mornings were about movement, getting up quickly, preparing for the day, following the routine. But this time, I wanted to stay, not to sleep, not to escape, but to feel, to understand. I placed my hand on my chest, took a slow breath, and asked myself a simple question. What is happening to me? There was no clear answer, but I felt something shift again. Not confusion, not fear, just awareness, as if I was finally noticing something that had always been there. I got up slowly. The floor felt cool under my feet. The air was fresh. Everything felt more real. I walked to the kitchen, made my coffee again, the same movements. But this time, I paid attention to the sound of water boiling, to the smell of coffee, to the warmth of the cup. Small things, things I had done every day, but never truly experienced. And suddenly, those small things felt meaningful, not because they were important, but because I was present, completely present. I sat by the window again, the same view, but I didn't look at it the same way. Yesterday, it felt distant. Today, it felt alive. I watched a man walking his dog, slowly, peacefully. The dog stopped often, smelling the ground. The man didn't pull him. He waited, patient, calm, and for some reason, that simple moment touched me. Because I realized something. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't trying to control everything. He was just allowing the moment to happen. And I wondered, when was the last time I lived like that? Without rushing, without pushing, without constantly thinking about what comes next. I couldn't remember. That thought stayed with me as I finished my coffee. And then something unexpected happened again. I didn't reach for my phone, not immediately. Instead, I picked up a pen and a piece of paper. I don't know why. It just felt right. I sat down and wrote a sentence. I don't think I am happy. I stopped, looked at the words. They felt heavy, but also honest. For a long time, I had avoided saying that, even to myself, because everything in my life looked fine. Nothing was wrong, nothing was broken, so how could I not be happy? But now, I wasn't trying to explain it, I was just admitting it, quietly, gently, without judgment. I wrote another sentence. I am not unhappy, but I am not alive. That one felt even stronger, and for a moment, I just sat there, looking at those words, feeling them, letting them exist. No rush to fix anything. No pressure to change immediately. Just truth. After a while, I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and got ready for work, like always. But again, something felt different. Not outside, inside, at work. Everything looked the same. Same desk, same computer, same conversations. But I was observing more, listening more, not just to others, but to myself. I noticed how often I checked the time, how often I waited for the day to end, how often I did things without really caring. And I didn't judge it, I just noticed. That was new. Because before, I was inside the routine. Now, I was seeing it from a small distance. And that distance changed everything. During lunch, I sat alone, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I took out the paper again, opened it, read the sentences, slowly, carefully. And then I asked myself another question. What would feel alive? This time, the answer didn't come immediately, but something appeared. Not a full answer, just a direction. Something meaningful. I wrote it down. Then another thought came. Something real. I wrote that too. Then, after a pause, something that feels like me. I stopped again because that last sentence was the most difficult. What feels like me? I didn't know, not clearly. But for the first time, I was willing to find out. That afternoon, I worked as usual, but something inside me had changed. Not my situation, not my job, but my relationship with it. I was no longer asleep inside my life. I was awake. And once you are awake, you cannot go back to sleep in the same way. That evening, I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I walked. No destination, no plan, just walking. The city felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I was seeing it, really seeing it. People talking, lights turning on, shops closing, life happening. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of it, not just moving through it. I stopped at a small park, sat down on a bench, and watched the sky slowly change color, from blue to orange to something softer. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Nothing dramatic had happened, no big decision, no life-changing event, and yet everything had begun to change. Because change doesn't always start with action. Sometimes it starts with awareness, with honesty, with a quiet morning, and the courage to listen. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt open, as if something new was slowly beginning. Not outside, but within me. And maybe that's where all real change begins. The days after that did not change quickly. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic moment where everything became clear. Instead, life continued. Morning, work, evening, sleep, the same pattern. But something inside me was no longer the same. That quiet awareness. It stayed, not loud, not demanding, just present, like a soft light in the background of everything I did. On the third day, I noticed something interesting. I was sitting at my desk, looking at my computer, doing a task I had done many times before. And suddenly, I stopped. Not because I was tired, not because I didn't understand the work, but because a thought appeared, a simple one. Why am I doing this? I had asked that question before, but usually I answered it quickly. Oh, for money, for stability, because it's my job. And those answers were always enough. But this time, they didn't feel complete. They were true, but not enough. And that difference made me pause for a long moment, just sitting there, looking at the screen, but not really seeing it. Instead, I was looking inward, trying to understand something deeper. That afternoon, I made a small decision, not a big one, just something simple. After work, I would not go straight home. I would take time to sit somewhere quiet and think. So when the day ended, I didn't rush. I walked slowly, letting the city move around me. And eventually, I found a small cafe. Not crowded, not noisy, just calm. I went inside, ordered a drink, and sat by the window. For a while, I did nothing, just watched. People passing by, cars moving slowly, light changing as the sun began to set, and then I took out my notebook again, the same one from before, the one that now held a few honest sentences. I opened a new page and wrote another question. What do I actually want from my life? I looked at it. It felt big, too big, so I changed it. When do I want? Right now. That felt easier, closer, more real. I held the pen, waited, and slowly. Words began to appear. Peace. I paused, then wrote another word. Meaning. And after a while, freedom. I stopped again, looked at those words. They were simple, but they felt important because they didn't come from thinking. They came from feeling. And that was new. For a long time, my decisions had been logical, practical, reasonable. But now, I was listening to something else, something quieter, but maybe more honest. I closed the notebook, sat back, and let those words stay with me. Peace, meaning, freedom. I didn't know exactly what they meant yet, but I knew they mattered. That evening, as I walked home, I noticed something again. I wasn't rushing, not physically, not mentally. Usually, my mind was full, thinking about tomorrow, about work, about problems. But now, there was space, not empty, but open. And in that space, I began to see things differently. Not just my job, but my habits, my choices, my way of living. I saw how often I said yes when I wanted to say no, how often I followed routines without asking why, how often I filled my time just to avoid being still. And that realization was quiet, but powerful. Because once you see something clearly, you cannot unsee it. The next few days continued like this. Nothing changed on the outside, but inside, everything was slowly shifting. I kept writing, not every hour, not every moment, just when I felt something. a question, a thought, a feeling. Sometimes it was just one sentence, sometimes only a few words. But each time, it helped me understand myself a little more. One night, I wrote something that surprised me. I think I am afraid to change. I looked at that sentence for a long time because it felt true, very true. Not afraid of failure, not afraid of losing something, but afraid of the unknown, of not knowing who I would become, of leaving behind a life that was safe, even if it wasn't fulfilling. That kind of fear is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't stop you suddenly. It simply keeps you where you are, comfortable, predictable. And I realized that I had been living with that fear for a long time, not noticing it, not questioning it, just accepting it. But now, something was different. I was aware of it. And awareness is the first step to change, not action, not decision, just awareness. A few days later, something small happened. At work, my manager asked me to take on a new project. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't unreasonable. In the past, I would have said yes immediately, without thinking. But this time, I paused, just for a moment. And in that moment, I asked myself a question. Do I really want this? Not, should I? Not, is it expected? But do I want it? And the answer came quickly. No. It wasn't a strong no, not emotional, just clear, simple. And that surprised me because I wasn't used to listening to that voice. But this time, I did. I took a breath, looked at my manager, and said something I had never said before. Can I think about it and let you know? It was a small sentence, but it felt important because it created space, space to choose, instead of automatically saying yes. That night, I thought about it, not from pressure, but from honesty. And the next day, I gave my answer, calmly, respectfully. No, it wasn't easy, but it felt right. And that feeling stayed with me for the rest of the day, a quiet sense of alignment, as if for the first time in a long time, I was living in a way that matched how I truly felt. And that moment, as small as it seemed, changed something. Because it showed me that change doesn't always begin with big decisions. Sometimes it begins with one honest choice, one moment of listening, one quiet no. And from that moment, a new way of living slowly begins. After that moment, after the quiet no, something inside me became steadier, not stronger in a loud way, not more confident in an obvious way, but calmer, as if I had finally taken a small step toward myself. The days continued, work, home, evenings filled with quiet thinking. But now, there was a subtle difference in how I moved through everything. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing, slowly, carefully, one moment at a time, one evening. As I sat by the window again, I opened my notebook, the same one that had slowly become a place of truth, a place where I didn't pretend, a place where I didn't hide. I read through the pages, the sentences I had written over the past days. I don't think I'm happy. I am not unhappy, but I am not alive. Peace, meaning, freedom. I think I am afraid to change. Each sentence felt like a piece of something, not complete, but real. And then a new question appeared in my mind. What am I avoiding? I didn't write it immediately. I just sat with it, letting it settle, because I knew this question was different, deeper, more uncomfortable. After a while, I wrote it down, slowly, carefully, as if the act of writing it made it more real. What am I avoiding? I held the pen and waited. At first, nothing came, just silence. but I didn't rush. I had learned not to rush these moments. And then, very quietly, something surfaced. I'm avoiding change. I nodded slightly. That felt true, but it didn't feel complete. So I stayed. Stayed with the question, stayed with the feeling. And then another layer appeared. I am avoiding discomfort. That felt even more true. Because change almost always brings discomfort, uncertainty, doubt, fear. And for a long time, I had built my life around avoiding those feelings, choosing what was safe, what was known, what was predictable, even if it wasn't fulfilling. I wrote another sentence. I chose comfort over truth. That one was hard to look at, but it felt honest. And honesty was becoming more important to me than comfort. That realization was quiet, but it shifted something deeply inside. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of energy, not excitement, but clarity, not about everything, but about one thing. I could not go back to living unconsciously. I could not pretend anymore, even in small ways. And that didn't mean I needed to change my whole life immediately. It just meant I needed to start being honest with myself in small moments. Every day, at work, I noticed it again. The habits, the automatic responses, the small ways I ignored my own feelings. But now, I gently interrupted them. Not perfectly, not every time, but sometimes. And those sometimes began to matter. During lunch, a colleague invited me to join a group. In the past, I would have said yes, even if I didn't feel like it. But this time, I paused, checked in with myself, and realized I needed quiet. So I smiled and said gently, maybe another time. It was a small moment, but it felt aligned. And again, that quiet sense of peace stayed with me. That evening, I went back to the park, the same bench, the same sky slowly changing colors. But something felt different, not just in me, but in how I saw everything. I realized life had not been empty before. It had always been full, full of moments, full of meaning. But I had not been present enough to see it. And now, as I sat there, I could feel it. The softness of the air, the distant sound of people talking, the slow fading of light. And in that moment, a quiet thought came to me. Maybe nothing needs to change immediately. I sat with that idea, letting it expand, because for the past few days, a part of me had been thinking about big changes, leaving my job, starting something new, doing something completely different. But now, I saw something else, a different path. Maybe change doesn't begin with leaving everything behind. Maybe it begins with how you show up to what is already here, with more awareness, more honesty, more presence, and from there, the next steps become clearer. Not forced, not rushed, but natural. That thought brought a deep sense of calm because it removed the pressure, the need to figure everything out immediately, the need to make a big decision. Instead, it allowed me to focus on something simpler, something closer. This moment, this breath, this choice. As the sky grew darker, I took out my notebook one more time and wrote a new sentence. I will start small. I looked at it and felt something settle inside me because small felt possible. Small felt real. I didn't need to change my entire life overnight. I just needed to take one honest step, then another, then another. And over time, those small steps would create something new, not suddenly, but slowly, gently, naturally. I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, Not excitement, not happiness, but trust. Trust in the process, trust in myself, and that trust felt like the beginning of something real, something quiet, but lasting, something that didn't need to be rushed because it was already unfolding, one small moment at a time. In the days that followed, nothing dramatic happened, no sudden success, no clear answers. And yet, everything felt different, not outside, but inside. The way I woke up in the morning was softer, less rushed, less heavy. I no longer reached for my phone immediately. I no longer filled the silence right away. Instead, I allowed a few quiet moments, just breathing, just noticing, just being there with myself. At first, it felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, because I had spent so long avoiding stillness, filling every gap with noise. But now, I was learning to stay, even when nothing was happening, even when it felt empty, because I was beginning to understand something important. Stillness is not emptiness, it is space. And in that space, life begins to speak. One morning, as I sat quietly by the window, watching the light slowly enter the room, I realized something. This, this simple moment was enough. Not forever, not for my entire life, but for now. And for the first time, now felt meaningful. Not something to escape, not something to rush through, but something to experience fully, gently, without resistance. At work, things were still the same tasks, the same conversations, the same environment. But I was no longer the same person inside it, and that changed everything. I began to notice small details, the tone in people's voices, the way stress moved through the room, the quiet moments between conversations. And I noticed something else too. Many people were living the way I used to live, busy, distracted, always moving, but not fully present, not fully aware. And for the first time, I felt compassion, not judgment, because I understood. I had been there for a long time, and maybe some part of me still was. But now I was learning, slowly, step by step. One afternoon, I did something I had been avoiding. I took a walk, without any destination, no plan, no purpose, just walking. At first, my mind tried to control it. Where are you going? What are you doing? This is a waste of time. But I didn't listen. Not this time. I just kept walking, slowly, breathing, noticing. And after a while, something shifted. My thoughts became quieter. My body relaxed. And I began to feel something simple. Freedom. Not the kind that comes from escaping life, but the kind that comes from being fully inside it, without pressure, without expectation. I stopped near a small street, watched people pass by, some smiling, some tired, some lost in their own thoughts, and I realized something deeply human. Everyone is carrying something. Everyone is searching for something, peace, meaning, connection, and in that moment, I didn't feel separate anymore. I felt part of it, part of life, not outside of it, not watching from a distance, but inside it, living it, breathing it. That evening, I returned home, sat down, and opened my notebook again. The pages were no longer empty. They were filled with small truths, quiet realizations, honest reflections, and I added one more. Nothing changed, but everything changed. I looked at that sentence and smiled slightly because it was true. Life was still the same on the outside, but my relationship with it had transformed. I was no longer waiting for a big moment, no longer waiting for a perfect opportunity, no longer waiting to feel ready, because I understood something now. Life is not something that begins later. It is already happening, right here, right now. And maybe that quiet morning, the one that felt so ordinary, was never ordinary at all. Maybe it was the beginning, not loud, not dramatic, but real. The kind of beginning that doesn't announce itself, the kind that unfolds slowly, gently, over time. I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay down, not with a mind full of worry, not with a heart full of pressure, but with something much simpler, a quiet sense of peace and a quiet trust that I didn't need to figure everything out, that I didn't need to control every step, that I could just continue, showing up, listening, choosing honestly, one moment at a time. And maybe that is enough. Maybe that has always been enough. If you are listening to this now, maybe you are also in a moment like this, a quiet moment, a small moment, one that doesn't seem important, but feels different. Don't ignore it. Don't rush past it. Don't try to explain it away. Sit with it. Listen. Be curious. Because sometimes the smallest moments carry the biggest changes, not all at once, but slowly, gently, over time. And one day, you may look back and realize that everything began with a quiet morning that you almost didn't notice. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening slowly. If this story made you feel something, stay with that feeling. Let it guide you gently. And if you want more slow English stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Take your time. There is no rush. We will continue this journey together.